Thanks, Chase. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So welcome everybody. This is a webinar. We're kind of focusing on furniture. And so I wanted to share some tips and tricks, some different methodologies that might help speed up with your furniture design, etc. So here's a couple examples of some of the stuff I've done. This is like a little wine cabinet I built. The drawer comes out, etc. There's a little ice bucket in here. And the reason I did this is so I could visualize everything and see like, how am I going to cut these joints? What length do I need to cut this piece at, etc. So I always model everything first to verify, form, fit, and function. Same thing for like, I was asked by the local school district to build a bunch of podiums for the classrooms. So of course I modeled it up in Fusion, got the correct angles and all that kind of stuff for these gusset plates, etc. And then I was able to use my CNC machine to cut out the parts. Here's another example of a bookcase. So I'm going to walk through and show some tips and tricks and some methodologies. As we're going through, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A, and I will try and glance at that every once in a while and answer those questions. Or Chase, if you want to interrupt or whatever and ask the question or whatever, that's totally fine. So
Definitely. Yep. I'll keep an eye.
okay. So the first thing I want to talk about with like furniture type stuff, woodworking, we don't have to just say furniture, I'm going to say woodworking, is using parameters. And what I mean by that is under modify, we have this change parameters. And I have a brand new session, so I have nothing in here, but you can create parameters and reference those. So for example, I'm going to be building a bookcase out of plywood. So I could create a parameter called ply or plywood and say that that's 0.75. Okay. And now when I do things, and you'll see this as we go through, I can reference ply instead of having to type in 0.75, 0.75, 0.75 on every single extrude that I do. Okay. And to do that, I just clicked on this little plus icon. So I'll do another one. For example, maybe in this bookcase, I'm going to have a certain number of shelves. So I'm going to just say num of shelves or something like that. Now, with this is a number. It's not like a distance. So instead of unit being inch, I'm going to say no units. And then I could say, I want 4 shelves. So I'm basically saying what I want the default number to be. You can also click on these little stars and basically those are your favorites. So if you get a pretty complicated design, you can pick on the ones you want to be like at the top or whatever, and you can tag those as being your favorites, for example. Okay, so that's one step. We're gonna keep going on this. So let's say I'm like designing a bookshelf. So I'm gonna go ahead and start by creating a new component. I'll just call this left side or something like that. And I'll start with a sketch. So here's another way that you can create those parameters. So I'm gonna draw this panel basically, and you can see right now it says 2.39. Well, I could type in width is equal to, like, let's just say 12. And then I'm going to tab over and I'm going to say height is equal to, let's just say 36 or something like that. And I just created, this panel, and it used, I'm basically created those variables. So if I come in here into my change parameters, you'll now notice I have width and height in here. So I could do it by using this little plus icon at the beginning, or I can do it while I'm designing. And that's kind of key because, as you're programming your design, you kind of have to know ahead of time what's going to change. What do I want to have variables, blah, blah, blah. But as you're going through, you can be like, oh, you know what? I want to create a variable called depth or something like that. And you can do it live instead of having to exit out, go into your change parameters and then create a new parameter. So I'll go ahead and finish this sketch and I'll say extrude. Well, how far do I want to extrude it? Well, the thickness of ply. So I'm going to type in, I'm going to start typing in P, and you can see there's ply right there. So I'll hit enter. It fills it in for me automatically. If I were to inspect this, we can see that sure enough, that's 0.75. Now you might be saying, well, why do I have to do that? Well, let's say you design this whole bookcase and you go to your big box store or whatever and you buy your plywood, bring it home and you measure it and it ends up being 0.77, right? Well, you could come in and change your variable of ply to 0.77 and your whole design will update. And I'll show an example of that here in a minute. Okay, instead of having to go into every single sketch and edit every single dimension where you used 0.75, you're basically just creating a reference. So really powerful tip there. Here's another one. I'm going to go ahead and create a sketch on this side right here. And I'm just going to draw a rectangle like so. I don't care what size it is. And I'm going to add a dimension here, and I'm going to say I want to create a dado, so I'm going to say this is ply. And so it's going to make it the thickness of plywood. Then I also want my dado to be the depth or half the depth of whatever my plywood is. So I'm going to put a dimension here and say that's plywood divided by 2. And you'll see that black line move over a little bit. I'll go ahead and make this collinear with this face, and maybe I throw a dimension for the height here. Let's just make that 3 inches off the base, for example. And then we'll go ahead and extrude this. Okay, another tip when you're designing furniture is how far do I need my dado to go? Okay, I could measure this and type in the dimension, but if I type in a distance, that dado or that cut is always going to be that distance. And what if you change the size of your cabinet or your bookcase or whatever? So instead of distance, I'm going to say go all the way through, or I could say to object. And when I say to object, I can select like this back face. So I could use either all or to object in this case. And the reason for that is if I were to change this, it will update. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these parameters. So let's change from 12 to like 24. And you can see, sure enough, my dado extended to that back face because it had to. Okay. So again, use things like to object or all or something like that to help make sure that your design can change if your design changes. And why am I making this point? Well, a prime example is I know a lot of customers that they'll design, like, let's just say a bookcase to go into a customer's home, and they have kind of a base design. Well, then they go into this customer's home and they measure the width and it's 73.25 instead of 72, let's just say. And they could just come in here and change the width variable and everything updates. They start cutting parts and they are building this thing. So building in the smartness into your design will really help being able to change the design down the road. Okay, so the thing there was using the variables and using like formulas. So remember that this is 0.75 thick. If I were to come in here and change my plywood, let me kind of move this a little bit. My plywood is 0.75. Let's just make it 0.25. You'll notice that that updated. And, so there's my data width of 0.25. And it's still halfway through the depth of my plywood. It doesn't matter what size this is. If it's 2-inch plywood or whatever, that's going to work. Okay. Here's another thing. And again, this is up to you. I'm going to set this back to 0.75. It depends on how you manufacture. So some manufacturers, they want to know the exact, that this is going to be 0.75. Then on the CNC machine, they might add in a little bit of tolerance. to allow for another 0.75 shelf to slide in there. Well, you could also do it inside of Fusion. So for example, I'm going to come in here and create a new variable called tall, and I'm just going to say like 0.02, let's just say. Okay. So now I have a variable called tolerance. In fact, I'll go ahead and make that a favorite. So it's up there. So I could make this dado. I'll go ahead and close this. Plywood plus TOL. And now you'll notice it's 0.77. Okay, now why would I do that? Well, it gives me a little bit of slop factor, right? So a shelf will fit in there, but I can always come back and say, you know what, that was too sloppy. I did a test cut. It was a little bit too sloppy. I'll come in here and edit this and make it 0.01. Say okay, and now that will update accordingly. All my datas would update accordingly or whatever, my rabbits, etc. So you can build tolerance into your design also. Okay, so let's take a look at, here's like a bookcase or a shelving unit. Notice my timeline is actually fairly simple, fairly short. And if I come in here and take a look at my parameters, I'm going to move this down so you can kind of see the changes. You'll see I have plywood, I have length, height, depth, the number of shelves, and I even have, you know, a 32nd inch tolerance. So for example, for depth, it's set to 12. Let's set it to 18, and you'll see the whole thing update. My shelves update, my sides update, etc. Let's change the length from 36 to 62, and you'll see that everything updates just by using some of these variables. And then let's say the plywood is now 0.5. I'll say okay, and let's just zoom up. And here, if I zoom up really close, you'll see that tolerance that I was talking about. So, and now the plywood is 0.5 instead of 0.75. So I could use this base design for multiple future designs. We change the number of shelves to 2. I basically get a base cabinet. I change it to 6. We'll have 6 shelves. Now it's an organizer or something like that, right? So building in these parameters will really help speed up your design process. And there's lots of videos, there's lots of information out there on using parameters. You can even use like if-then statements. I'm not going to show that, but you could say, if the height of my cabinet is larger than 72, add an extra shelf or something like that. You can do some pretty smart design with these parameters. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and undo back a little bit. The next thing I want to talk about with furniture design in Fusion is configurations, and these are fairly new, but you'll notice we have this configure menu here. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into this configure, and it kind of tells me what can you configure, and we'll talk about these as we go through, so I'm not going to spend too much time there. But you'll notice I have this blue bar that's going around, showing me that I'm kind of in this configuration mode. And right now I just have one configuration. What's neat about this is I can click on this add parameters. So I'm going to click on this little FX here, and you'll notice there is now these little check boxes. So I want to be able to control the length, the height, and the depth, and the number of shelves. In this example, I don't care about the thickness of the plywood, so I'm not going to add that, and I don't really care about the tolerance. And what that just did is it added those fields into my configuration table. Well, then I can come in and add another configuration. So, and we can change this. So I could say, let's make the length be 60, and you'll see that that will update accordingly. And let's make the height be 52. We'll make the depth be 24, and we'll make the shelves be 3 or something like that. Okay. And so I now have 2 configurations. If I activate this first configuration, Here's the 36 by 44 by 12 by 4, right? Here's my second configuration. So again, I'm using the base model, the base design, and just making different changes to it using these configurations. And this is a pretty simple example. I could add in a bunch of different parameters in here that I might have in my sketches and stuff like that. So um, I'm not going to spend too much time on configurations. I could do a whole webinar just on configurations. You can even show visibility. So you could, have a configuration where the cabinet doors are on. You could have a configuration where the cabinet doors are off, stuff like that. It's pretty amazing. So let me add in just one more configuration here. Let's make this a narrow one. Let's just say 18. And let's add 6 shelves or something like that and make that a 18 or something. So, okay. Now I've
Hey,
created these
hey, Brad.
configurations. Yeah.
Quick
Yep.
question for you from,
Yeah.
or well, I don't know who it was from. It's anonymous attendee. What they're asking about what you set your shelf spacing as.
Oh, that's an excellent question. Thank you, Anonymous, for asking that. So in this design, if I go into my pattern, and it's going to look kind of weird because of this design here, but you'll notice I have my quantity set to shelves, so the number of shelves. I have my distribution set to extent. Okay. Now I could also say I want these to be 12 inches apart. But what I did here is I said, I know what the overall height is. So I want that to be whatever the height is. And then I added 6 inches. And the reason for that is it would put a shelf up higher and then it brings it back down. So it kind of matches this distance here because this is a 3-inch offset. I could even have a variable called toe kick or something like that. And whatever toe kick is that, the height, that's what this would be, for example. So yes, I used extent. So it's basically taking the overall height and making the number of shelves fit in that particular height. So hopefully that makes sense. And in fact, hopefully we have time to do this. Oh, let's just do it with this guy here. Okay. So I'm going to come in. Let's take a look at our parameters really quick. So my overall height is 36 inches in this case. So I will come in and do a rectangular pattern of that guy there. And I'm just going to start to drag up so we can kind of see that. So if I say the distance is height, watch what happens. Oops, I did that in the wrong one. Sorry, guys. Let me do that one more time. I always do that in the wrong one. Rectangular pattern, this guy, drag it up. I should have looked for that number. So extent, yep. And then distance, I will say is height. And you'll see that it has that extra one right there. So there's 1, 2, 3, right? So I want to bring that back down. So I'm going to say I'm just going to say -3 in this case. And you can kind of see that. And so I would just say in ×2, or I could say -6 or whatever. So I'm basically saying whatever height is and subtract a certain number from that. So that's kind of how I did it in this case. And now if I change the quantity, you'll see the number of shelves is always going to stay in that particular distance. And the spacing could be 8 inches, it could be 7.5 inches, it doesn't matter. So yeah, great question. Okay. Okay. Let me get back to the shelf unit. So configurations, you'll see over here, I now have this configuration and I can pick whichever one I want. So 1, 2, and 3. I can also rename these configurations, which I highly recommend doing. In the table, I could call this, rename it and say, wide, rename this one, whatever, 6 shelves. So you can give them different names. Okay. The other thing that you can do is create appearance configurations. So I'm going to right click on my shelf unit and say configure. And you'll notice it highlights all of the components in there. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where I could turn visibility on or off. So I could have a configuration where there's no shelves. I could have a configuration where there's doors or there's not doors and stuff like that. I'm going to change the appearance. And by doing that, you'll notice it created this theme. And I'll go ahead and create two different themes here. And then I'm going to go into this little appearance icon. What this allows me to do is, let's just go into solid wood, I'll say finished. And I'm just going to drag, let's just do cherry up there. And let's do oak up there also. And then I can say for theme 1, I want that to be the oak. And for theme 2, I could say I want that to be the cherry. And then up here, I can come in and specify which theme I want these to be. And I sometimes get this to work, sometimes I don't. Okay, so now if I go into my, this one here, yeah, it's not gonna do it for me, of course, live. I think I have to apply it to, let me do the appearance one more time and drag that, remove and say, okay. This is what happens when you rush. Yeah, okay. I did it wrong, but you can tell it to apply the, yeah, there we go. Cherry, let's do oak, say, okay. So theme 1, theme 2. Hopefully this will do it now. Why? Yeah, there we go. Okay. I was just missing one click. So here you can see it's oak, and then here you can see it's cherry. So I know I kind of went through that pretty quick, but basically I created, or I added two different materials, the oak and the cherry, and then you specify which theme or which appearance you want them to be. And I could also rename these. So I could rename this guy to oak and this one to cherry. Now, why am I showing this? Well, a lot of times you might be making furniture for a client and you want to show what would it look like with a laminate countertop? What would it look like with a granite countertop? What would it look like with, a cement um, countertop? You could use the exact same model, but just change the appearance and just quickly go through these configurations and show what those would look like. Different trim options, different hardware options. Is it a pull handle? Is it a vertical or horizontal handle? Stuff like that. Knobs versus handles. And how I would do that is I would have a handle in place and I would have a knob in place, and then I would use the visibility option in the configure. So I would turn this on and off, and for the configuration that has handles, the knobs would be turned off. For the configuration that has knobs, the handles would be turned off, or the visibility would be turned off. So you can very quickly show multiple different furniture designs using one assembly, using your standard assembly. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's see how we're doing here. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is some people use what's called skeleton design. Um, I would I would play around with it. I would practice it. I think it's really powerful if you really understand how it works. And basically what you do is you kind of create a skeleton and then everything is attached to that skeleton. And then when you go back and change that skeleton, everything else changes. So let me just show a quick example of this. I'm going to create a new component. I'll just call it skeleton. And I'll draw a quick sketch here, kind of defining the size of this. So I'm going to say width. In fact, I'll just call it W is equal to 24. Height, H is equal to 32. Okay. And then I will extrude this. And I'll say depth is equal to 18 or something. So this is kind of like my skeleton shape. Then what I can do, I'll go ahead, I'm gonna activate this top level here. I'm gonna change the opacity of this to be like 50%. So it's kind of like this ghosted shape. Now I'm gonna start designing my cabinet, and I can come in and create a new component. I'll call it side. And I'm just gonna click on this face right here and say extrude. And before I do that, I'm going to create a parameter called plywood. So I'll just call it ply 0.75. Okay. So I'm just going to click on this face, say extrude, how far? I'm going to say minus ply in this case. And you can see it basically, it used the shape of my skeleton and it put that in there, 0.75. Let me activate my skeleton really quick. I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to create a mid plane that kind of slices through the middle of this, because then I could do things such as mirroring the side if I wanted to do that. So for example, I'll come in and say mirror. Um, what's the object? I'll say is the side, and I want to make sure I mirror my component. Let's do the side. What's my mirror plane? I'll pick that mirror plane there. We get that guy there. Okay. Now I'm going to just do one more quick thing here. So I'll say new component, we'll call it back. And I'll create a sketch. And again, you can kind of see I can reference the skeleton here. And I'm just going to create a quick rectangle, just something like this. Okay. And I want, let's just make this edge here collinear with that back edge there. And I want this edge to be whatever plywood is divided by 2. Okay, so again, I'm basically creating a rabbit. Okay, and then I'll do the same thing here. I'll click on that existing dimension. It's going to reference it, so I don't have to type in that formula again. And then the last thing it wants to know is how thick is this? Well, I'm going to say it's plywood divided by 2. I want that to be a smaller back. Okay. Then I can go ahead, whoops, I'll zoom a little bit too far. I'll go ahead and extrude this. Again, how far do I need to extrude this? I'm going to say to object. I'm just going to pick the bottom. Oops. Give me a second here. What did I do wrong? Start to drag down. I'll say to object and click that bottom face. I think must have clicked the mid plane. So I'm basically clicking the bottom of that skeleton. And then the last thing I'll do here is, they're intersecting. So I could come in and say, I want to combine, and I want to combine cut. So my target is going to be this side right here. Let me turn off my skeleton so it's not getting selected. So let me say this side, the tool is going to be, this back, and I want to keep that tool. And we just cut a rabbit in the back right there. Okay. And then I'll do the same thing for this other side. Target is that, tool is that. We want to cut, we want to keep the tool. If I turn off the back, we can see the rabbit. Okay. So I'm basically using that skeleton to kind of define the overall size. Now, if I go back and activate this skeleton, we can see very simple. It's a sketch and it's an extrude. Okay. In fact, I could even come in here, turn on my sketch and say show dimensions. And let's just change this from 24 to be 32. And you'll see that that wall moved. The back also extended because they're all kind of built on this skeleton. If I change the height to be 18, I'll go ahead and turn off the skeleton so you can kind of see what's going on here. It's still updating all of those parts. And so you can kind of think of the driving aspect of this is the simple box, okay? And this could be very handy if you're doing like multiple cabinets, laying them out next to each other or something like that. You could start by blocking out where these cabinets are going to be using like these skeleton blocks, getting those sized correctly, and then you use those to start designing your cabinet. So just another thought. I don't use it all that often. I've done it in the past, but I kind of like the in context design where I'm building piece by piece and assembling them together, that kind of a thing. Okay, let's see. Let's go back to this shelf unit here. Actually, I think I'm just going to reopen it since I've made some modifications to it. The next thing I want to talk about is just like in woodworking, you can create jigs in Fusion. And I recommend this. I actually do this quite often. So for example, let's say I want to put some cabinet doors on this, and I'm going to use those pocket hinges or whatever they're called. I can create a jig. And so you can literally see that here. So this is, a cylinder that's the right size hole for that pocket hinge to sit in. It's at the right depth. You can see I have two little pins here. This is actually where the holes are going to be. And I did spend, quite a bit of time, dimensioning this and making sure it's the way I want it to look. So, everything's kind of centered. I'm basically saying, if this edge here is the front of my cabinet, I want this hinge to be 2 inches back. And this could be whatever distance you want that to be. Okay. And you'll notice everything has, a dimension to it and all that kind of stuff. So fully constrained. And then I use that to extrude this now, and I just saved it out as a hinge jig. Then what I can do is on my design here, I'll just insert this hinge jig into my current design. Now, what I didn't show is I actually have configurations on that jig, and I'll go back and show this. But you'll notice I have two separate configurations. One's, a taller offset than this one here, for example. So depending on, what you're building, you might have to have these hinges a certain distance from the top or the bottom, or a certain offset forward or back, all that kind of stuff. You could build that smartness into your design. And use those as configurations. So I'm just going to start with this one here. So when I say insert and it has a configuration, it actually lets me pick which configuration I want to insert, which I think is really cool. I'm going to go ahead and say okay, and you'll see it will bring up or insert in, and it brings it into like 0, 0. So I'm just going to drag this off to the side. And if we take a look at it, you can kind of see it just kind of floating out here in space. Well, this is, just like you can buy jigs where you stick it on your piece of wood and then you use that to drill. That's basically what we're doing with a 3D model. So I'm going to use the align command. So instead of creating joints and all that kind of stuff, all I really care about is just putting it where I want. So I'm going to say align, and I want this upper right corner right here to go right here. And you can see it sort of put it there, but it's going the wrong direction. So I'm going to say flip, but it's still kind of in the wrong location. Well, it lined up those points, but I can just click on this angle here and it's going to rotate every 90 degrees. So I just hit angle twice and it puts that jig right there on that piece of wood. Then I can come in and say, let me capture my position. What's my target? That. What's the tool? That. You'll notice keep tools is automatically checked and grayed out because it's referenced. So, and then I want to do a cut. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, let's turn this guy off. And my hinge hole and hinge, screw holes are in the exact location. I didn't have to create a sketch for every single hinge hole. I can turn this guy back on, come in here and say align. Let's align this bottom face. I'm just going to click the face there and click the face here, and you can see it jumps down. And I'll do the exact same thing. Target tool, say okay. And just that quickly, we now have these two hinge locations, hinge cup locations using a jig. Now I would probably mark the jig saying this is the front, this is the top or something like that, just to help orient things. But I just kind of wanted to point out how simple something like this can be. And then the other cool thing is I can have different configurations of it. So if I go into here, you'll see configuration 1 and configuration 2. So this one's a lot taller, but it's not offset as far back as the other one was. So let's go ahead and insert this into our current design. This time I'm going to do configuration 2, and you'll see it brought in that other configuration. And I'll just do the exact same thing really fast. I'll just say align, and I want this upper corner with this upper corner here. Flip it, there it is. I'll subtract it really fast. And we now have a different jig that we used. It's not set as far back and it's lower than the other one. So you can see you spend a little bit of time programming your jig, getting the configuration set up the way you want, and then you can bring them into any design and reuse them over and over again. So hopefully that makes sense. It's pretty cool, I think. The next one I want to talk about is arranging and nesting. Now you do have to have a paid subscription to be able to use arrange and nest. I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on this, but I just wanted to put that disclaimer out. If you're like, hey, how come I don't see arrange or whatever, you do have to have a paid subscription of Fusion. So I use nesting quite a bit. I find it extremely powerful. Arrange, let me just kind of show this really quick. So we have in here, we have arrange, and then we have the more advanced nesting. Arrange is good, but there are some drawbacks. And what I'll show here is when I say arrange, it's asking for the components. I'm just going to draw a box around all these components. And you can see there's 15 of them. Okay. I'm going to go over to this envelope and specify, I want to lay it out like on a flat piece of wood. Okay, so I'm going to click on this guy here, and I already have it set to, a 4x8 piece of plywood. You can see that kind of right here. And it took all of these designs, all of these parts, and laid them out. But you'll notice they're all different thicknesses. So it doesn't take into consideration material thickness or anything like that. So this is only, I would say, only good for same thickness arrangements. For example, all of these gussets and stuff. And I don't know why, for example, these two are intersecting. I actually don't know the answer to that. These you can see nested quite nicely, like inside this curve and all kind of stuff. But this design has multiple different thicknesses to it. Also, if I wanted to make 12 of these, like I was asked to, I would actually have to physically copy this assembly 12 times. And then when it comes to objects, I'd have to select all of those objects. So it requires the number of parts on the screen that's going to be arranged on your sheet, for example. Okay. Now it is handy. It is useful, like I said, for same thickness type things. What I'm going to do now is show nesting. I'm not going to demo how to create a nest. I actually already created one in this design. So what is kind of cool is I can come in here and say create a nest, and it's going to automatically analyze and find out what it can nest. So if I had hardware in here and stuff, it wouldn't put it in there. So it figures out what the quantity is, all that kind of stuff. Okay. I jump into my manufacturing workspace and I go into my fabrication. You can already see the result. Give me a second here. I go into my fabrication tab and it allows me to do a lot more than the range does. And so, for example, you can see all of the different materials, all the different objects. And if I click on one of these, you'll see it shows, the grain direction, the quantity of them, all this kind of stuff. And so I can like go through here and make sure that, the grain direction is going the way I want on all of this. Um, so I have a lot more control over that. I also have control over like what quantity do I want of each of these, et cetera, et cetera. Again, not teaching how to do this, but you can see the results I get. And here's why I use the nesting. It automatically figured out the different material thicknesses. So this is basically my plywood. So we can see all of these pieces fit on the plywood. Then I actually created materials for the posts. So I can see like how many posts can I get out of a 96-inch long, 4x4 or 2x2, whatever it was. Okay. Same thing with like, let me just do like this guy here. Here's the feet. So I could see how many I could get, out of a 96-inch piece here, for example. And then I can see I need to cut two of those. So I would need to buy two of those and I'd have to buy two of these for the other one. So that's how I use nesting, is almost like a cut sheet telling me what do I need to buy, how much do I need to buy, how much waste am I going to have, that kind of a thing. So here's my remnant over here, for example. So again, if you're interested in nesting, we can, reach out to us. We can show, how to use it, all that kind of stuff. This was just a high level overview. In fact, if you have any questions on anything you're seeing, please feel free to email me, and I'll make sure we get those answered for you. So, okay, where are we at on time? Man, time flies. So the next cool thing, this is fairly new, that I think is going to be really handy, especially for like furniture design, woodworking, etc., is the automated drawings.
Hey, Brad,
Yeah,
another quick question for you.
yeah.
So Steven said, so observing grain direction in the model and true nesting will do it automatically. And then he said, are router posts available for woodworking tools?
Oh, yeah, excellent. That's a great question. So yes, and I didn't show this, but my next method I would come in here is create a cutting tool path. I'm using a CNC machine. Am I using whatever, plasma, water jet, etc. And then I would post this out. And so, yes, there are a bunch of different posts out there. So, I use Mach 3 personally on my CNC machine, but there's like wiki posts and ShopBot posts and stuff like that. And you would just say, I have a ShopBot, and you know, it gives you options like where's your 0, 0, is it using radius curves, blah blah blah. So yes, there are multiple posts out there, and like I said, if this is something interesting to you, reach out to me and we can do a quick demo or something like that for you to answer those questions. So okay, let's go back to the bookcase. So automated drawings, all I have to do, so here's my bookcase. Now this is kind of a weird example. I modeled this from some plans, and each part was labeled like A, B, C, D, and all kind of stuff. And I don't really have a lot of structure, like left side assembly, right side assembly, or whatever. But I'm going to come in here and say new drawing from design. And you'll notice this new option up here that says automatic. So right now it's set to manual, and you can see it says sheet count of 1. When I click on automatic, you can see, okay, it figured out it's going to have to create 31 sheets to draw everything. Yeah, and I don't know if any of you have messed around with drawings, but the old way was you'd put a base view, and then projected views, and then create a new sheet, repeat, base view, projected views, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. It was fairly lengthy. Automatic not only creates all the sheets for you, it automatically dimensions the parts for you. And you'll see an example of this. And I kind of call this the 80-20 method. So it'll do about 80% of the work for you. And then you probably need to move a dimension or say, I don't want this dimension, or let's move this over here. So 20%, fixing things up. But you had the computer do all the other work. So let's take a look. I'm going to say automatic. I'm going to do the full assembly. I can even use a title block, that I've created. And so you'll notice everything else grays out because all this information is being pulled from the title block. And I'm just going to go ahead and say, okay. And this takes a little bit of time depending on the complexity of your design. So you can see generation has started. It may take several minutes, that kind of a thing. If I expand this open, you can kind of see the progress down here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up an existing one while that's processing in the background. And you can see what it did. So it created all of these sheets, and using my title block template, it has the logo in here, it has the name, it created a parts list for me, it numbered them for me. And then this is that 20% part I was talking about, where I might come back and move some of these around, making it look the way I want it to look or whatever. Okay. But the power behind this is when we start getting into like these individual components. So here's part B, like I said, kind of lame names, but shaded view in the upper right, and then it shows like the overall length, width, and height in this case. Obviously that was a pretty simple one. But then when we get to more complex, let's just do like this guy here. We can kind of see, it has the dados and all kind of stuff running through it. It automatically dimensioned all of this for me. I didn't have to do any of this. Okay, let me show you how that works. So I'm going to click on this auto dimension, and it brings up this dialog, and you can see it's doing baseline dimensions, and it put 12 out of 15 possible dimensions on here. And that's what this density slider is. So if I crank this all the way up to the top, you're going to see, more dimensions are added in, and that might be too many. It tries to figure out what is the best for manufacturing this model. So it did all this work. Now I might come in and say, I don't want this dimension here or something like that. And I could add in my own dimensions if I wanted to. So, I can do whatever. So it just kind of does all the hard work for me. You can kind of see, put the angle in there. It did the radius in here. I mean, I didn't have to do any of this. I just think that's really, really impressive, and it speeds up a lot of time. Now, with that said, you still want to verify each of your drawings, because like I might come in here and want to say, R5 two places or R5 typical or something like that, right? I want to make sure that the dimensions are where they need to be. I also have the ability to change what these dimensions look like. So these are like, symmetric. So you can kind of see, I could get something that looks more like this. I could do ordinate dimensions if I wanted to, crank up the number there, and you see we would get, more of them or whatever. And then one of them is actually just overall dimensions. Maybe that's all you care about is, overall dimensions. So okay. And then, so that again, I'm not teaching you how to use automated drawings. I'm not teaching you how to use nesting. I'm showing some of the tips and methods that I use when I'm doing like furniture design or woodworking. I'm hoping this will get some gears turning. You go, oh, I didn't think about that, parameters and configurations, all that kind of stuff. If you want more information about any of these topics, there's a bunch of information out there. So the last thing I want to actually talk about is, let me go back to like this bookcase, for example, is some of the add-ins that people have created to help make things easier in Fusion. So if I go under utilities and go into add-ins, we have this Fusion App Store. And it brings up a web page on my other monitor. So I'll drag it over here and you can see a bunch of different add-ins. Well, notice one of the areas is woodworking. So I'm going to click on woodworking and there's a bunch of different add-ins in here, such as mortise and tenon and box joints and dovetails. And I'm just going to kind of keep scrolling through here. One of them is like a dog bone creator. Yeah, this nifty dog bone. So I'm just going to click on that and it has a description of what it does. Usually they have like pictures or videos and all kind of stuff, but you can see it creates these little like round recesses so parts could, slide in together, for example. So, regular fillets, and then you can specify like what kind of dog bone. So there's, full radius or whatever, and then there's corner, and then there's just, bunch of different kinds. So, and many different add-ins for that. So here's one that creates dowel joints. There's one called Joiner CAD and all this. There's just a bunch of different options in here that I would recommend taking a look at. Some of them are free, some of them are paid or whatever to support the author, that kind of a thing. But take a look at that, and that could potentially also speed up your design process. So we are 5 minutes from the top of the hour. I usually go over, so I'm actually pretty happy I got everything I wanted to cover within the hour. We can open it up for questions. If any of you have any questions or comments, um, we'll spend 5 minutes doing that. I see there's a bunch of chats. Let me take a look at that. Looks like Chasey
Yeah,
Rack's reading those. Yeah.
yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but he was basically just asking, what if the post doesn't exist?
Okay.
So I took a stab at that.
Yeah, it's pretty. I would say it's pretty rare that the post doesn't exist. What is more common is the post might need to be modified. So a lot of companies, customers, like I'll just pick on ShopBot, no affiliation or anything like that. I could go out to their web page and download the post that they provide. But my table might be set up a little bit differently, so I might have to tweak that post to make it work for my machine. In fact, I always say cut air first, right? Like set everything up, don't put material on there, and have it, does it draw a rectangle like you were expecting it to, that kind of a thing. Next Gen Solutions does a lot with working with posts. So if you have a particular machine and you need help with that, please reach out to us and we can see what we can do to help out with that. But it's pretty rare that you write a post from scratch, honestly. I don't have the page up, but Autodesk actually has a web page you can go to and it lists all the different kinds of posts. You can search by machine like Mazak or Haas or whatever, and then it lists all the different ones. And then you might see one that says generic Haas or generic whatever ShopBot, and then that's what you would probably start with. So, but any other comments or questions, you can put them in the Q&A or the chat. Hopefully this was helpful. I wish these were like 3-hour webinars.
I know.
Right? So much to cover. But,
Well, these are always really great. Yeah, I think someone requested, yeah, Finn had said I'd love to see a webinar just on configuration, so maybe that's something
okay.
we add to the queue. Um, Otherwise, yeah, there might be a little delay. Actually, well, no, with IMTS, I will probably do it about a month from now, this next webinar or the week after. But yeah, otherwise, looks like we got one more message. Finn, thank you.
Thank
Incredibly
you, Finn.
helpful.
Yeah.
Steven said, did you answer this one? Is there any custom, no, looks like it just came in. Is there any custom
Okay.
capabilities like iLogic in your tools?
Um, I'm not 100% sure. Like iLogic, are you meaning
Or
like
is it
if
iLogic or,
then? Yeah, I think it's iLogic. I've heard the
okay.
term before, but I'm not really strong on it. You can do like if then statements. In fact, if I show, let me go here. Um, Let me go parameters, um, variables. I can't never remember what to type in. Um, It actually shows, that's on all forums. Let me just do uh, variables. Um, Shoot, I can never remember what to search for, but you can see what all the parameters go here. Yeah, of course, it takes me to the cam one. Configure user parameters. Yeah, there's a table that shows everything that you can do. Expressions, let's see. Yeah, these are all like videos. They changed it. I apologize. I should have probably had that up. Um, but you can see all the options of cosine, sine, you can do ceiling, floor, if thens, if then nested. I mean, it's like you can do some pretty powerful stuff. Like I said, we could probably do a whole webinar just on parameters and a whole webinar just on configurations. I do have a customer, they design like the seating in restaurants, and their parameter table is pages long, but they can literally say, I want an L shape with a 4x6 corner, and it's filleted, and it adds extra joists in there and all, depending on what they're doing. It's pretty impressive. So um, Stephen, thank you for your feedback. Appreciate that. So,
Awesome. I think we are reached the end.
okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Like I said, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. My name's right up here. It's Brad Tallis at nextgensolutions.com. It's all one word, no period, no space, no nothing. So if you have any questions in regards to this webinar, just let me know and I'll try and answer that for you. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.